Hi, I'm Debbie Reynolds, the Data Diva, and you are listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker, and today we have our interview with Debbie Reynolds, the Data Diva. Debbie and I have been in the same circles on LinkedIn for many years now, and we've been kind of talking about being on each other's podcast for a while, and we finally managed to make it happen. I was actually on her show just a few months ago, and now I have the pleasure of having Debbie on this show. Debbie's got a long history with privacy, both in consulting with companies and even with the U.S. government, and of course with her long-running Data Diva podcast. Debbie's one of those people out there fighting for our privacy rights every day and making a difference out there for you and me. So I was happy to have her on the show. Thought it would be great to bring her perspective and experience to you. So today we're going to be talking about privacy in IoT devices or lack thereof. Similarly with cars, that's gotten really bad. We'll talk about privacy problems with AI and also her particular contributions as part of the U.S. Department of Commerce's IoT Advisory Board. So lots of great stuff to talk about. Why don't we get right to my interview with Debbie Reynolds. Debbie Reynolds is a data privacy and emerging technology expert and the host of the Data Diva podcast, where I was recently a guest. So now it's time to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on the show, Debbie.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's kismet, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We've been following each other for a long time on LinkedIn, I know, and responding to each other's posts. But this is long overdue, so I'm glad we had a chance to finally get together and get you on my show. So you have been involved in privacy consulting since before it was really cool. I mean, you've been doing this for plenty of time now, and you've been involved in a lot of really key privacy initiatives. And you've been doing your podcast for several years as well. So I'm curious from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest shifts over time in the privacy space? And, what trends are you seeing that will impact privacy most in the future?
Yeah, great question. So the trends that I've seen over time, I would say at the time that I got interested in privacy, actually, take you down memory lane a bit. Mm-hmm. I read a book called The Right to Privacy in 1995. It was a book that my mother had, and she was very interested in this concept about what was private and what wasn't. And so I read the book, and I was shocked, actually. So I think growing up in the U.S., you think we're the land of the free, the home of the brave, and we have all these freedoms. And so just to know that privacy isn't guaranteed really in the Constitution was kind of shocking, right? And so that book really talked about kind of those legal gaps about what's private and what wasn't. And so the thing that was happening around that time, I was more into technology at that point. So kind of the dawn of the internet age, basically. And so I started seeing, I'm like, well, wow, once all this stuff gets out of file cabinets and off people's desks and gets online, this is going to create all these issues. And so I really followed that over the years. And eventually, so my technology work started in digital transformation. I'm self-taught technologist. And so as I started working with these big companies on big projects that they wanted to do around the world, you had to kind of know how you could move data around without breaking laws, basically. Mm-hmm. So in around 2014, 15, so this is around the time that the European Union was updating their data privacy directive. So this was as they were brewing because they had a directive and they had it since the mid 90s, right? Early to mid 90s.
And shortly after the Snowden revelations too, right about that time.
Yeah, exactly. All that was kind of brewing around the same time. Actually, McDonald's Corporation called me and they were like, hey, can you come talk to me about privacy stuff? I'm like, well, yeah, so I was saying, this is, I know that this is a European regulation, but it's going to be a huge deal. And this is how it's going to impact you and your business and litigation and all this other type of stuff. And so after that, just people started calling me about privacy stuff. So I thought, well, why don't I do this as a job, So yeah, a couple years after that, when the General Data Protection Regulation came out, I got called to be on television. So PBS called me to talk about GDPR and why it was important. And it's so funny because people still call me about that interview because quite a few things I predicted in that interview actually happened. So that's kind of my journey and my interest in privacy. So I think the big change I've seen since my initial interest to kind of now is that, people are more interested in it, right? Because what GDPR did in Europe is kind of make privacy more of a C-suite issue, right? So it's more about economics and stuff. And so before, people didn't really care about, especially in the U.S., about privacy. So that's the thing that changed up to this point. I think the thing that will change from now going forward will be more focus on privacy, especially as companies are moving more into AI and a lot of these other emerging systems where they're using data of people in different ways. And so it's kind of raising the risk of how data is being handled, and it's creating issues with transparency. And that's what a lot of these regulations and that's what consumers want, a lot more transparency.
Well, a question I love to ask people, especially people with a lot of background in this and different backgrounds in this, and that's why I asked the same question multiple times, is how do you define privacy? Like, what is your definition of privacy? And the picture I always paint, I don't know why I go to this, maybe I just love cocktail parties, but when you go to a cocktail party, you bump into someone you don't know and you're telling them what you do and they say, oh, privacy, and if they sound the least bit interested and you talk about this, what is your go-to argument for convincing people that they should care about privacy?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Yes. Most times we say privacy, people just kind of glaze over. They don't really understand what exactly you're talking about. But my definition of privacy is the right for a person not to share their information.
Yeah.
So to me, that's ultimately what privacy is to me. So that means that if I can decide not to share my information, that gives me kind of control or agency over how my data is used. And that's what I really, really want, right? We don't really have that right now, especially in the US, because, a lot of the data uses that happen with us don't require our consent, right? Maybe sometimes people give notice, maybe they don't. But then you end up in this situation where an individual is sort of trying to opt out of things. Is almost like swatting flies, right? So it becomes like a very difficult thing. So my definition of privacy is always kind of the ability for people to keep things private if they want. And so when I'm at a cocktail party, it's so funny because I may have someone kind of glaze over about privacy, and then I try to talk to them about stuff that they do online and stuff. And then once I talk to them about it, like, literally people, they're flailing their arms. They're like, what? Oh, I can't believe it. So they're like upset within like 5 minutes, basically. Mm-hmm.
Is there a particular thing that always makes the light bulb go off? Is there one anecdote or something you tried out that always gets people's attention?
Yeah. Like I asked them about social media and, the stuff they do on their accounts. And I'm like, hey, that some of this data gets sold. And they're like, what? Sold to who? Who wants to, I'm like, I tell people, you have a phone in your pocket and you walk to the coffee shop like twice a week. Like somebody somewhere is tracking that information, and that information, somebody wants to buy it, right? And who knows for what purpose? Maybe it is innocent. Like, hey, I want to sell you more coffee because you go to a coffee shop. Or it could be, hey, a crime was committed on this path and you walk there every day, so you're a suspect, right? So It's like, you never know how that data is being used, and people just don't comprehend what can be done with this data.
Well, one of the most interesting things that I've seen on your resume that I want to find out more about is your participation in the IoT Advisory Board at the U.S. Department of Commerce. And so I'm really curious. First of all, why was this group formed? What was it about? What was your role there? And then maybe what were some of the key findings you had in your 2024 report?
Yeah. Wow. I'm glad you asked that. So this board was created as a result of a law that was passed around trying to get outside experts to advise the government on different types of initiatives or different like technology movements that are happening in the world. And so the IoT Advisory Board was formed. We had to, we had to do background checks and all this stuff. But they chose 16 people, 16 Americans to be on the board. I was one of 16 from all different industries, from all different kind of vertical areas of technology. So, it'd be agriculture. I mean, just anything you can think about, let's say when you think of IoT, that's another thing where people kind of glaze over when you say IoT. What's that? What's that? I'm like, basically any device or system is connected to the internet, which is basically almost everything.
Today, yeah.
So it's like, your electric toothbrush, the toaster that you bought that has like a screen on it now, cars, tractors, just almost anything that you could think of.
Yeah.
So as we were getting into this thing, they were kind of vertical. There were different industries that we were looking at. So we were looking at, and then horizontally. So we were looking at supply chain, chips. As we were going through this whole thing, what we realized is that privacy and cybersecurity sort of went horizontal across all of this. So I ran the privacy part of that program. We met for 2 days a month for 2 years.
Wow.
And that didn't count all of our kind of sidebar meetings that we had to have. We had a federal officer and everything's on the record. And so it's just, kind of an ordeal to deal with. But the report came out. I'm really proud of it. I think I made 14 recommendations and all 14 of my recommendations were accepted. So you basically have to, it's almost like a court thing where you have to kind of, argue your case and get the people to vote. And it's like a consensus. And so if people, let's say 14 people agree and to your recommendation and 2 don't, you got to figure out why the 2 don't and then try to get them, in a consensus and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of crazy, actually. So some of the, it's funny because I just did a continuing legal education thing for the Practicing Law Institute, and we talked about this report and we were talking about what had happened after. So this is very funny. You think this is funny. So I think there were over about 150 recommendations in the report. I had 14 and went horizontal, right? But one of the most controversial recommendation in the report is the one that I made, and that is that I think that there should be privacy information on vehicle stickers when they get sold. And so the lobbyists came out with their pitchforks and, they were talking about how are we going to kill innovation and all this stuff. And so I had to light them up on the federal record. And eventually I got all of the members of the board to vote unanimously to put that recommendation in the report. But when the report came out, then the reporters started calling me because they thought, people are super hot now about cars and they were like really interested about it. And so the most of the reporting about that report has been that particular recommendation and kind of cars and data and stuff like that. So I'm really proud of that.
Who was the ultimate audience, or what was the ultimate purpose for that report? Is it going to inform like a set of guidelines from NIST, or what is the output of that report going to be used for?
Yeah. So it has multiple purposes. So it's kind of a Swiss Army knife. So part of it is to inform certain government agencies. There may be policies and procedures that they may want to change as a result of the report. Some of it is for industry to give them a kind of idea what the government is thinking or what the government should be thinking about in the future as a result to IoT. And then part of it is for Congress. So some of it may be things that they want to take up in terms of law or regulation or legislation. So I'll give you an example. One recommendation is in the report, and this is about privacy policies. So we're saying companies that sell IoT products to the government should have to write privacy policies that are in plain language. Okay. So the government actually has a standard for plain language within the government and how they communicate to public. Right. And so we're saying make your suppliers align with the standard that you already have set in place for yourself. as it relates to privacy policies of IoT. So that's something that, so every agency can decide how they want to implement that if they choose to do so.
I don't know if this was an executive order or whatever, but I know there was at one point where I thought it was the White House was saying that they were going to put together some IoT standards, and at least from the government's perspective, say anything that the government buys has to meet these standards. Was this part of that or related to that in any way?
That, I think you're talking about the cyber trust mark, perhaps?
That was part of it too for security, but I think, I may be misremembering this, but I thought at some point there was a thing that said because they can't, short of a law, they're not going to get other people to do these things. But if the government with their buying power can say, we're not going to buy this if you don't meet these standards, then that still has an effect. Yeah.
No, there was a statement made. I had to do research on this stuff. There's a statement that says that the government should, make sure that companies they do business with align with some standard, whatever that is. And so I don't think the standard has been kind of defined, or it hasn't been rolled out in a way where it's rigid. You know what I'm saying? So I think the statement was, hey, we should think about this, but there really wasn't any meat behind how to do that.
And as we know, there's a big difference between should and shall, right? That, when these documents, should just means doesn't really have teeth behind it. You could ignore it, but shall is we're looking for shall someday.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So, as I like to say, the P in IoT is for privacy, meaning of course that there isn't any. What are the real dangers of connecting everything to the internet? What types of devices, in your experience, are the worst? We've talked about cars. You mentioned toasters and things, but I mean, for the vast majority of people today, what are the devices that we have in our house or that we carry with us that provide the most privacy dangers?
Yeah. I don't think there's a particular one in the house that is more dangerous than the next. I think that, for example, let's say, for instance, if I ask a lot of people, how many devices do you have that connect to the internet? And they'll say your phone and my computer. What they don't say is my thermostat or my doorbell or my smart speaker or, let's say people have sleep apnea and they use a CPAP machine that's connected to the internet, right? So all those things, to me, I call Internet of Things devices computers without screens, right? So they're doing things, but you can't see what they're doing, right? And so think about your computer and think about all the passwords and different security measures that you take on those things. And these IoT devices have basically none of that. So let's say you bought, I was in the market to buy a new washer and dryer. And when I went to the, different places, I couldn't believe it. Every single one almost had a sticker on it that said, oh, we connect to the internet. And I thought, this is horrifying, right? Because it's I can kind of figure out when my clothes are done. I don't need to get a text message about that, right? But a lot of times when these things get connected, what people don't know is that they aren't properly secured, right? So the person who's connecting it, they want to get it on the internet. And actually, I read a stat that says that most IoT devices, connected devices, are attacked within 5 minutes of being on the internet. So think about that being a gateway to the rest of your network, right? Because you have it on your network. So I think people just don't understand. And then kind of maybe the worst of the worst, maybe back to answer your question, is the devices that still work but are kind of out of warranty and maybe they aren't getting updates. They have old firmware on it. Those are the things that hackers love or cyber criminals love, right? Because they know, okay, well, these things are out of date. If I can find these things, I know they have a vulnerability because my software is more updated than that. And so they look for those things to attack. And that's a huge problem.
And thankfully, most home routers have a built-in firewall and network address translation that kind of work together to kind of obfuscate the devices that are behind that. So otherwise, thankfully, our video doorbells generally are not directly on the internet because they have to go through our router. And also, thankfully, our router has protections built into it to hide that stuff from the broader internet. Because otherwise, this stuff would be horrible. And yet, they're still hackable in certain ways if you're not careful. And if you just want to find out what devices of yours and your home might be on the internet, just go to Showdown and put in your IP address. And hopefully you won't be surprised, but you might be. But yeah, it's the security of these things is an afterthought. That the other thing we say is the S in IoT is for security, which means there's none of that either. But now I want to talk about cars, because you mentioned cars, and this to me is the one where people just don't have a clue. Well, they're starting to get that way because there was a big Consumer Reports article about this. I have seen this hit the mainstream media, but it is really horrible. And modern cars are all connected to the internet, whether you paid for, in-car Wi-Fi or not. There's still telemetry. There's still cellular data being sent from your vehicle constantly. And, Google and Facebook are bad. App tracking and real-time bidding, those are all bad things. But today we can still kind of do something about those things. We can use firewalls. We can use ad blockers. We can use things like that and better browsers. But you can't do anything about your car. It's horrendous when it comes to privacy, and there's almost nothing we could do. So some people tried. You can remove the cellular radio from your vehicle, but in a lot of cases that'll void your warranty, because there's actually software updates you're getting for your car. Your car is a computer on wheels, and it gets software updates too, and so it'll void your warranty. First of all, talk me down. How bad is it? And then is there anything we can do about it?
It's as bad as you think and worse. And you're right, there's really, really hard, basically nothing you could do about it unless you want to buy a 10-speed bike instead of having a car, or get an old car.
Really old car, yeah.
A really, really old car that doesn't have all these kind of technical doodads. So I had someone from one of the major car organizations tell me that data can be wirelessly transmitted from your car within 3 seconds. Okay, so this is near real time reporting about everything that you do. The ridiculousness of it, you wouldn't even believe. So, I'll tell you what. So, most modern cars have cameras inside the car looking at you, right? And most people don't know that, right? So, typically you think
they're well hidden. It's not easy to see them either.
Yeah, most people think, okay, if it's a camera, it has a light, or it's flashing, or it's telling me something. What they don't know is that, even the modern cars, the mirrors, they have cameras in it. And so anything that's recorded or captured in the car can be transmitted out of the car. And Lord knows what they can do with that, right? So whether that be a stalker, a company, trying to sell you stuff. I went to a conference once and they told me that they know how much water is in the wheel well of your car, right? So this just gives you an idea of the granularity of the information. They'll know what time of day you open and close your car door, right? How many seconds your door was closed or open, where you went, everywhere that you went. Maybe they could be making a judgment about you and say, hey, Kerry drives this bad neighborhood, so his insurance needs to go up, right? So it's every time you drive in your car, it's you're taking a test of some sort that you don't know about, right? Your car weighs you. So every time that you get into a car with an airbag, it weighs you, right? So where does that data go, right? So they say, okay, it may have a safety feature. So the purpose of it initially was to weigh the person so that if you're in an accident, the airbag knows how much pressure to apply or whatever. But then that data goes someplace else for other purposes, and you don't know what that is. Maybe it's hey, we're going to raise your rate because, you gained 20 pounds over 6 months or something,
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the cameras inside the car, people think why in the world are the cameras facing inside the car? Well, some of them are using for your attention. They want to make sure that you're not falling asleep or you're not looking down at your phone or something like that to warn you that, hey, you're not paying attention while you're driving, which also your insurance company might want to know. Tesla engineers were found looking at videos of people in and around vehicles, and some of them in rather intimate settings. And I think New York Times with Kashmir Hill broke the big story about how this data is being sold to data brokers who then sell it onto insurance companies. And people find that their rates suddenly go up because they accelerated too much or they hit the brakes too hard too many times. Or like you said, maybe they're traveling around in neighborhoods where bad things happen to vehicles and they're wondering why their rates went up, and they find out it's because they got sold out by their cars. It's absolutely ridiculous. And there are lawsuits now because of this, and from Texas and other places. Do those have a chance of succeeding? Is that what's going to save our butt here?
Maybe. So I'm actually, Cashmere sort of lit the fire, I think, her and some other people. And so we kind of threw some logs on that flame for her. And so, yeah, I think these lawsuits, interestingly enough, the Texas has two big lawsuits going on right now. One with Allstate and one with GM. And so all the automakers, because I'm in touch with a lot of these people, they just went bonkers when they saw that. Because they're like, oh, no, we have to change everything that we're doing or whatever. I think that they have a very good chance of, the states have a very good chance of succeeding and maybe get some, huge concessions here because, the problem has been, these companies don't have problems writing checks, right? So they don't care about that. What they care about is like, you're going to change somehow. You're going to make them make a change in their business model in some way. So there's a chance that both of those will happen. So maybe extracting some money, and then also trying to get some type of business change as well. Yeah.
Well, I know that because of the New York Times article and possibly just some of the lawsuits, I know that some of the U.S. manufacturers have backed off some of the data sharing they were doing. At least they said they have. I don't know how much transparency we have into that, but there has that pushback has already helped a little bit, I hope. But yes, it's horrific, and
I spoke at a conference last year with some car makers, insurance makers, and so I do talks about like beyond regulation, right? So the things that people are upset about, there may not necessarily be a law about it, but you probably, people don't like that, right? So people don't like that you're taking pictures of them without them knowing about it and you're selling information, right? And so like in the case of, so your car basically has a credit report almost like you have, right? It's probably longer, probably 300 pages of stuff for everything that you've done right in your car. So if you're taking a test, shouldn't you know that you're being taking a test? That doesn't make sense. So you're graded on something that you don't even know about, or something as ridiculous as, let's say you have a app on your phone for your insurance company and you're in the car. Like, okay, if let's say your phone is in your pocket, or you give your phone to your friend to like have them look up something, just the movement of that phone could make them think that you're distracted. But that data has no context, right? They don't know if it's you operating the thing or someone else. They don't know if it fell out of your pocket or it's just jiggling around. Like, they don't know, but they're testing you on that, and they're making an assumption about you and your, attention or whatever that probably shouldn't be made. And that's like, to me, that's a huge problem with transparency.
Well, and of course, somewhere along the line, you agreed to their terms of service somewhere. When you first got the card, you first turned it on, was there a pop-up message that said you said okay to, and then and who knows? But and of course, they change those all the time without letting you know, they let you know in ways that you don't notice. Yeah.
I talk to companies all the time about this. And so I think in the future, consent will have to be incremental, right? So it can't be there's a wall of words, this 80-page policy that you click a box for at the very beginning, because a car is an investment, so over 90% of people in the U.S. have a car, have access to a car. A car, for some people, is their biggest purchase that they make, because not everyone is a homeowner, right? And so it's an asset that you have over many years. And so that, because it's connected to the internet, it's changing, right? So it's changing in terms of capability, functionality. It's changing in terms of what's collected and what's not. You're changing, right? So you may change your mode of living or how you do different things. And so I think it's not sufficient just to think that when you first buy a car that you sign this stuff over, and you're not sufficiently, in contact with, or the automakers or whomever, they're not informing you about what's happening with the car, the things that are different. So to me, I think consent in the future will need to be more incremental and sort of just in time, whether that be educating people for, a particular thing they want to do, or informing them or giving them like an option. Like, hey, we're going to do this with this data because you did this. And you're like, hey, I don't want that. Yes or no. So I think that's where we have to go.
Well, and like you say, with cars, it's, it's a potentially a $50,000 investment is, I think, the average price of a vehicle today, which is crazy. But it's not like they can send you something that you don't want to agree to, and then all of a sudden you can say, well, if you don't like it, go get another car. That it's not like trading in your video camera or your doorbell camera. It's a whole different deal. You can't be expected to do that just because they changed something on you.
Exactly. It's a huge problem. And so, I see the smart companies, they're kind of tearing up their playbooks and they're trying to align more with what a consumer will want or what they would expect. And so to me, that's where you get into the most problems, where you're doing something with data that doesn't really benefit the person, right?
Yeah, right,
so
right.
You make it really hard to explain why you're doing the stuff with the data. And if it doesn't benefit the person in some way, you're going to be in hot water regardless of regulation.
Well, of course, the other buzzword today is artificial intelligence, and it's being added to everything. Like everybody and their brother is rushing to add AI to their products to try to get you to buy new ones or whatever. It's the marketing thing, and it's almost impossible to avoid. So what's your take on this? What should people understand about how AI impacts our privacy? And what advice do you have for people to avoid or at least maybe mitigate some of these AI issues?
Yeah, good question. So companies are adding in AI like goo on everything. So this is like on everything, right? Like throwing gravy on everything. So it's pretty interesting to see, some companies will succeed and they'll do it in a way that actually helps people. And then others are trying to make it like a marquee thing. Eventually, I think AI, if it's done correctly, it sort of enables companies to do things that they weren't able to do before. But a lot of that is maybe transparent to the user, right? So from a privacy perspective, transparency is an issue, right? Where people want to know what's happening with their data. They want to know how their data is being used. And so companies have not traditionally done this well. So they've traditionally not been transparent about data. So now you're bringing in a more complex type of computing environment where things are even more black box or, less clear about how that data is handled. And so a lot of these privacy laws, the way they're written is that they're like, hey, you have to be transparent. You have to let people know what you're doing with your data. And so all that is about kind of the data provenance. Like, do I have a legal right to have the data? And then lineage. Like, what do I do with the data through the data life cycle? And so if data has a life cycle, right, from cradle to grave, privacy data, your personal data should, right? So your data shouldn't live forever on data systems. And so companies have traditionally not have to do that. They could keep stuff forever, right? And so this is one of the huge problems we have in cyber, where a lot of the breaches that companies have is from old data. So it's this legacy stuff that they should have gotten rid of. They didn't need it anymore. And it basically just increases the risk for the company and the risk for the individual. So from a company level, they need to keep stuff less, try to tie their data uses with a purpose, try to get rid of stuff. But then from a consumer perspective, especially AI systems, I say think really closely about how you share your personal data and who you share it with, because when it gets into these AI systems, you really can't get it out, right? So it's sort of like scrambling the egg. You can't really unscramble the egg, right? So don't put it in the egg. Like you're making an omelet, don't put it in the omelet. So if you do that, I think that will help to mitigate some of the risk. But, I tell, it's so funny because the way companies are looking at AI now, they're like, let's just throw everything in and it's going to do these magical things. We're going to get a diamond at the end. It's more like...
It's like pixie dust. We're going to spread this on everything.
Yeah. So I think it's more like, think about making a recipe. So if you make a recipe, when you select certain things that goes into the recipe to make what you want, you wouldn't take everything in your refrigerator, throw it in a pot, and then stir it all up together. You just wouldn't do that, right? So the data AI systems is similar. So you have to really think about what data that you're putting in there, and then knowing that, just throwing it in there doesn't mean it's protected and it's safe.
So what do you tell people? Like, how do you avoid AI today? How do you prevent, or mitigate the risks for personally? Like if you're using ChatGPT, if you're using Microsoft Word now, who's put Copilot into Microsoft Office, what, if anything, can I do to minimize my risk to giving up too much data to these AI systems?
Yeah. Well, Microsoft's So what they did is very different than what we see with ChatGPT. So let's say you're using ChatGPT. Don't put your personal information there. So don't put your financial information. Don't put like anything that you want to keep secret and private is best not to put it into those systems, right? So maybe if you want to write a letter or something, don't put your social security number in there, So don't create a situation that creates more risk for you. With Microsoft, it's very different where, their products have so much stuff baked in that it's almost impossible to get it out of that. And so this is the AI goo that I'm talking about. It's kind of thrown on everything. So for that, if you use Microsoft Office with your other personal stuff, you're in the cloud, they're, throwing this Copilot in there. You really don't have very much control. I'm not sure if you can even opt out a Copilot.
I've seen very differing articles on that lately. One that says it's really hard and one that says you can't do it. So I'm not sure which it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I just saw it pop up on my computer the other day and I was like, what? Oh, goodness. Yep. Can't believe it. But they're making it harder and harder for people to opt out. They're trying to make some of the stuff very foundational to how they're using it. But in situations where you can choose, like I have been telling people for years, like not to put their personal information on the internet. So don't put it into chatbots. So if you have a control, if you can do your work or do the things that you need to do without putting your personal information in there, that's good. I talk to companies all over the world also about people not putting their company's confidential proprietary information into these chatbots as well, right? Because when they're in there, you kind of lose control. So that's the message, really.
Well, and this is the thing that actually gets me the most. It's one thing about a brand new product that you can choose to use or not, like ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Maybe you've heard about it, maybe not, but you'd have to actually go either sign up for an account or download the software app to actually participate in that. You have to at least make that effort to do that. Where these other products are just magically AI is being injected into it through a regular software update, just like you always do and like we always tell you to do, because there are bugs that need to be fixed. And right along with those security fixes come these new features, including AI features, where all of a sudden now, unlike before, you are potentially sharing data with a cloud server just by editing a document on your computer, which you weren't doing before. And in fact, Amazon Alexa is now threatening to, well, they're not threatening. They say they're going to start recording everything you say all the time. They're not waiting for the wake word anymore. They're not trying to do local stuff. Amazon came right out and said, we're going to ship all your stuff up to the cloud all the time. How is that even legal? Like how, because somewhere you're going to agree to that. Now, there's a smart speaker over there. I don't know. There's no button to click on to say okay to the terms of service. So how are they getting away with that from a legal standpoint? And then I, as a user, I pay for this product. I should own this product. I should be able to run whatever software I want on this. If I don't like the way this product is turning into an AI monster, I want to be able to either roll back to a version that doesn't have that feature or put on my own third-party software. And yet we don't allow that in this country either. It really seems to be over a barrel here.
We are over a barrel. This is concerning, right? Where it's a contract of adhesion, right? So either you accept everything or nothing, basically, in terms of how they're rolling out these features. And so what they're basically doing is taking advantage of the fact that there aren't laws and there aren't regulations that are stopping this. So some of these features they're doing, if you look very closely, some of them, they cannot roll them out in the European Union because they're against the law. But so because there aren't laws, we don't have laws to cover this in the U.S., they're taking full advantage of that, right? So catch me if you can. That's kind of the game that we're playing right now. So it's, it's just, it's troubling for sure. One thing I want to bring up, I want your thoughts on it. When DeepSeek came out, a lot of these ChatGPT and all these other companies, they were horrified, right? Not only because it was alleged that they were able to train their model really cheaply. I tested it out. It's actually pretty cool. So they've been trying to say all types of stuff about it. But the thing they didn't like about it is that you could actually install it yourself on your own system and you didn't need to be in the cloud. And so that's what they don't want. They want you in the
Right.
cloud so they can get all your stuff, right? Because I remember olden days, you buy a computer and you could configure it and you could use it. You didn't have to be online. You didn't have to
Right.
apply for an account or do all that type of stuff. Now it's like almost impossible to do it without the cloud. And so these companies, they want to keep you in the cloud, right? Because that's how they're going to get all this data. And then also that's how they get all this money. So that's one of the reasons why they like pitchforks out for DeepSeek, because they're like, oh my God, they can, you don't need $1 billion, $500 billion to make this new data center. I can just, put it on my laptop that you bought from Best Buy and do what you need to do.
Yeah, it's so bad because not only do they want your data, but then they want to connect all your internet devices to cloud services so they can charge you a subscription to keep using that physical device that you bought. Like, why should I have to pay a subscription for my toaster? And yet, that's where they're all going because they want that ongoing revenue. And to make it all worse with the AI in particular is they want to also ingest all your data so they can further train their models to make them even better than their competitors. And it is a snake eating its own tail, and it's just gotten awful.
Yeah, so that's a good analogy, actually. Snake eating its own tail. That's exactly what it feels like. Yeah.
Certainly breathing your own exhaust. That's another way I've heard it too. So you've had a lot of experience talking with companies, and not all my guests do. So I want to pick your brain on this a little bit. I'm curious. I'm sure that the companies probably fall into two main camps, and that is the companies that treat privacy compliance as just a checkbox exercise where, they want to minimize their legal exposure, basically. Like, tell me what I have to do to not get sued, and that's what I want to do, and that's all I want to do. And then other companies, and I'm guessing this is probably the minority, but I want your take on this, see privacy as actually a core value. So when you're working with companies like this, first of all, how do those two different approaches impact our privacy outcomes? And then how do we convince companies that personal data isn't, to be hoarded like gold, but really to be minimized, like you were saying before, and managed like toxic waste, like collect as little as possible, keep it for as short as time as possible. How do we get companies to adopt that mindset?
Yeah, I think, that's really interesting. So I don't know. I think companies have kind of competing interests, and they're trying to balance them all, right? So obviously they don't want to get sued for the most part, right? But the big companies, they can write checks forever. It doesn't really matter to them. But what they really don't want is the regulator to step in and change their business or make them change the way that they behave, right? But then what we're seeing more and more now is public outcry where consumers actually say, hey, we don't like this, right? And so we're seeing companies sort of retreats from some of the things that they try to do because of the customer backlash. Because at the end of the day, they want their money. They want to make that revenue. And so if they see something that they're doing that's going to minimize their revenue, to me, that has been probably the most successful way that I've seen companies change. So I think, I don't know. I don't know. Even the companies that we think about that we feel like they really champion privacy, like Apple. So I like Apple. I like their devices, but they're not perfect, right? So they, there are some things they've done that have raised my eyebrow, especially lately, around how they handle their people's data. And for me, I don't think regulation solves everything, but to me, I wish it was something where it wasn't based on the attitude or the behavior of one company. Does that make sense? So it's like, okay, well, we're going to decide, tomorrow that we're going to really abuse your data because we decided that we didn't like to do that, right? So I wish there was kind of more of a foundation for kind of just table stakes. Like, here are the basic things the company should do, from a regulatory perspective all across the board. I'm not really seeing that. So I'm seeing companies try to, try whatever way possible, whether it be the bad way. Let's take everything and then, fight me in court for 10 years, or, we just want to minimize, our own risk, but then also try to keep our customers happy. And so trying to find that balance. So I'm seeing companies try to do a bit of both, I guess.
So how do you make the case when you're talking to these companies and they're throwing this stuff at you, and you're getting the idea that, like, look, just tell me what I got to do, and they're not really drinking the Kool-Aid on privacy, right? What is there? Do you have an argument that you make to them is like, look, this is actually good for you. If you taking privacy by design, taking privacy as a core principle for your product, making it making it a marketing thing like Apple's done. Whether they're doing the best job of it is still debatable, but they're doing a better job of it than certainly I would think a lot of other companies are, and it's a marketing point for them. Yeah. So what's the argument to these companies when you're talking to them about how making this something that could be good for them?
Yeah. Well, I tell them, I'll use the example of the automakers and stuff like that. So I tell them, do you want to lose $1 to make a dime, basically, right? So it's like your behavior is going to reduce or is reducing your client base, your customer base, your loyalty base, right? So, for example, when this report came out from the New York Times or Kashmir Hill, I went through, because I was researching that at the time, I read through all the comments through, on all the articles and stuff. And there were people like, my family's been, we've traditionally bought GM cars. We had this brand loyalty for all these years. And like, because of this, I'll never buy another GM car because I don't trust them anymore. Right. So how much money, like you maybe made, 10 cents or, $100 a year off of this person, and you're gonna, lose like a $50,000 sale because of that. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I tell them, like, this is really not just about regulation. It really is about consumers and what they expect and really providing the service. So the service is not just the car; it's also the data that you deal with with the customer. So thinking about it in that way and trying to align it more where it's a benefit to a person and not something that people see as kind of a nefarious intent is kind of the way to go.
In your experience, what are some of the biggest privacy mistakes that companies make? Even if they're trying to do the right thing, we don't always do it. We don't always succeed. When you're consulting with these companies and you're seeing what they're doing, what are the high runners? What are the things that are common ways to trip up when trying to do privacy right?
Yeah. Two very common things that happen. And this happens, remember when I talk about the data provenance, meaning the legal right to have data, and the lineage about what happens to the data. So most companies go off the rails on lineage in two ways. So one is data collected for one purpose ends up getting used for another purpose. And that's because they don't have to track that data the right way. And then the second way is that companies retain personal data too long. And so it ends up something that becomes like a business risk for them because then it becomes like a high breach risk. So from the off the rails thing, I'll give you an example. So Twitter, many years ago, they had decided that they wanted to offer people multi-factor authentication, right? Yeah. And they said, They say, okay, give me your email, give me your phone number, we'll set this up, right? So they asked people for it, and then there was an opt-in, right? So that's the provenance part. So they did that part right. Okay. So they want to do this new feature. They asked they can get the information. Fine. No problem. Okay. So then down the line somewhere, marketing got a hold of this data and they started using it for marketing advertising. And so that was a problem and they got in trouble for that, right? And so that is the data privacy problem that a lot of companies run afoul of because a lot of times either they don't know or that they don't care about the origin of that data and why they collected it in the first place. So from a privacy perspective, what they should have done is if they decided that they wanted to use that for marketing, they have to go back and ask that person, say, hey, we collected it for this, but now we want to use it for that. Are you okay? And if they're okay with it, then go forward. But a lot of times when companies, they're very good at collecting data, but a lot of times they lose control of the data in the organization. So it gets duplicated, it gets split up, it gets moved around. And so that data, the purpose for which the data was collected doesn't travel with the data now. It should, right? I think there needs to be more technology put into play in terms of making sure that the purpose of that data maybe is even in metadata where that's recorded somewhere so that they know when they're going to run afoul of that. And then just keeping data too long, right? So, you're creating a risk for your company. You're creating a risk for the person. If it's breached, like the T-Mobile it's so funny because I can't even talk about the T-Mobile data breach because I think they've had multiple ones. I just say, the one that happened like 2 quarters ago and stuff like that. That big breach that they had, it was literally some old customer or potential customer list that had no real business value. It should, like, if they just pressed delete, that would have never even happened, right? And so companies, they keep stuff way, way too long. And so what privacy laws or regulations are doing is that they're saying your data, the data that you keep about someone, their personal information, should align with your purpose. So once your purpose has expired, then you should get rid of the data, right? So T-Mobile in that situation, they had files going back many years from customers who attempted to get accounts but never did get an account, but they still had their credit information. And so there was like no way that they should have even kept that information.
And that has happened oftentimes with breaches, that the people that have applied for something are employees that are no longer there, or customers that are no longer your customer. They kept their data anyway, and it got breached because they didn't purge it. Yep. Mm-hmm. So you talk about phone numbers. We've had a do not call list for a long time, and it sort of works. I don't know. I still get a whole lot of spam calls. A lot of them are probably from outside the country, but nevertheless. And then, we've tried this do not track thing on the web twice now. We had do not track, and then we had global privacy control. And they honestly they're ignored. So why is there not, and I know the answer is we don't have regulation, but in the US, we lean heavily on this notice and consent model, the opt-out model. So why can't I, as a consumer, have a single place to go to and say, just stop. Like, I don't want any of this. So until I say otherwise, don't track me. Don't send me ads. I don't want any of this stuff. Why can't we have that? If we have this opt-out model where you have the power, companies love to tell you, oh, you've got the power, just find the setting. It's real easy to find. Sure, you can find the setting somewhere that you can stop us. Why do we not have one global place to do this?
Wow, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? I think the complexity benefits companies because they want to make it hard so that you can't do it. But it's just like almost impossible from a user perspective. And so, like, I actually did testimony for the state of Vermont on a bill recently, and of course, the lobbyists showed up, and one of their big things that they always talk about is, like, oh, we provide these goods and services, so, or you're going to kill innovation, or so, they make some type of excuse for why, you can't opt out, or why they make it really hard. But that's why we're seeing a rise of like agents, like companies that do this work where they'll go out to all these different places. I had to align it with something that happened to me. The analogy I gave was my niece when she was in high school. She lived with me, and I had put her on punishment for something. I told her she couldn't watch TV. She loved Naruto. So I told her she couldn't watch TV. And then I went in her room. She was looking at Naruto on the computer on YouTube. Sure. She said, well, you told me not to watch TV, not on YouTube, right? So we have so many different channels of where data can be collected about us. And so it's like whack-a-mole almost, right? So like global privacy control, first of all, it's not global. And then the second is that's based on websites, right? And so that doesn't really translate to devices and things like that. And then we have Apple, who did their app transparency, and that's for marketing on their phones. So if you have Android, that doesn't count for that. And so there are just all these different ways in which data can be collected. And then for IoT, it's getting even, that much more complex, right? So there was a story many years ago, I'm sure you appreciate this, you probably even know about this, where a casino was breached because they had a thermometer in a fish tank. So,
smart thermometer.
So the landscape is vast, it's huge, it's big, and then AI makes it easier for companies to be able to make these calls and do all these things. So it's like catch me if you can, totally on that. So actually I found a trick. I'll give you a trick here that I found out. And so a lot of calls that you get on the phone are AI calls, right? And so they try to have AI call you first, and then they try to put up, if possible, they try to connect you with the human, right? So what you can do is pick up the phone and then don't say anything. So I do this all day. So I pick up the phone, I put it on mute, and then they hang up, right? Because they think it's something wrong with the number. And eventually they're going to stop calling.
Interesting.
So I do that all day. I'm like in the grocery store, like, boop, mute. I'm like, boop, or whatever. So
interesting.
So yeah.
Does it help? Do you think it's actually reduced the number of calls you've gotten?
It does help. Huh. It does help, right? Because you get calls from, a lot of times it's from the same number or the same exchange or something like that. So eventually they'll stop calling because they think it's something wrong with the number.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So we've talked a little bit about GDPR, and that is thankfully, the EU has addressed some of these things. And of course, it's not perfect. And in the United States, we have yet to come up with a federal privacy law, but we've got California and some other states that are doing some work in the CCPA and the CPRA, for example. So first of all, what is your assessment for things like GDPR and CCPA? Did they kind of get it mostly right, or maybe what needs to be improved? And then, second, how do we expand privacy protections to everybody else who is not in those places?
That's another $1 billion question you're asking there. I think the GDPR in Europe helped a lot. If for no other reason, it really just raised the awareness a bit of kind of the difference between the rights that we have versus the rights that, people in Europe have. So just an example, like some of the things we're talking about, Amazon, was it Amazon? They're pulling like all this data into their cloud. So like for the smart speakers or whatever, a lot of these things they can't even enact in the EU. So people are like, well, what? Or we're seeing that in the US, like you may sign up for a service and you're like, hey, you have these rights only if you're in California. And they're like, what? Like I'm in Missouri. Why can't I have those rights? So I think from a consumer perspective, we're like, well, why is it so different from one state to the next, or one service to the next? And so it just creates like, a lot of confusion, and people are like really upset about it. So I think that these laws have been good as an example to show kind of what can be done or what should be done in terms of laws and regulation. And so in the US, I think the Supreme Court has had a couple opportunities to kind of make some statements about some of these lawsuits around privacy. They have traditionally kicked those down to the state level. So I think the game in the US is state level on privacy. And I think it will remain to be so for a while. Unless someone gets religion and decide they want to do it on a federal level. But I don't really see that happening right now, unless they do something that doesn't allow people to sue, which would be almost worthless.
Well, one thing I'd like about GDPR and the California laws is a lot of times we benefit from them even if we don't live there. This was true with like emission standards, right? When the cars had to comply to emission standards, Ford and Chevy were not going to make two different vehicles, one for California, one for the rest of the U.S. So we all kind of benefited from that. The internet could be, it's a little more easy to kind of fracture the internet, so you could do one thing in California and one thing in the EU and something else somewhere else, but it's still extra work for all the developers and the companies that have to manage that. So we do still get some of the benefit for these places, but as you said, also it now also makes a stark contrast. It makes people aware that, hey, somebody out there does have privacy laws and I don't. I want those too. And furthermore, in the US in particular, when we're on a state level, you can go to your state legislature or your state representatives and say, hey, you don't have to even write this from scratch. Just copy California's law. I'll be happy with that. Like just photocopy theirs, sign it here, and give it to us too. We want that too.
Yeah. People don't know, or people don't understand, or maybe I didn't even comprehend how much a consumer's voice really counts in terms of being able to make your voice heard. And so, write a letter, go on ChatGPT, say, hey, write a letter to my congressman about this I don't like. And so those types of things do get attention. They do end up moving the needle, because if they feel like, the lobbyists, this is $1 billion industry. So, they're in the state houses, they're, going to cocktail parties, they have the ear of these legislators, but if they're not hearing from the public, they don't have a different side of the story, right? So being able to tell those stories, individually, and just participating in, democratic process, I think is helpful, because, just back to Catherine Hill and her reporting, the thing that GM was doing at that point was not quote unquote illegal.
Right.
But it was people did not like it, right? And so they have to change their behavior. So if we see more of that, I think we'll see more behavior change from companies, even swifter than a lawsuit or any regulation.
All right. So last question before we go. What else can we do to fix this? I absolutely agree that you need to make your voices heard, vote at the ballot box and vote it with your wallet. But what other things might you recommend? What else could we do to help firmly establish our privacy rights so we don't have to worry about using modern technology? I want to be able to use these things and not have to think twice about it.
Yeah.
I want to get to that utopian future where this technology is working for us. So how do we protect ourselves and our data until then?
Yeah. I think you think very hard about what you're trading. Like, is it a fair trade? So I don't think I can't think of any technology use where the benefit is more to the user than it is to the company. But it should be, not so just ridiculously asymmetrical. So think about what you're giving up. So for example, I think Amazon, at one point they were telling people, hey, give us your biometric, your fingerprint, and we'll give you a $10 coupon, right? And so
right.
I think that doesn't sound like a good exchange, right? So think about what you're giving and what you're getting in return. And so figuring out what that balance is. So some of that may be, hey, I don't trust these guys. I won't give them my information. Or say, okay, I trust this company. I like them. I'm willing to share. So just think through that before you click on a link or download an app or different things like that. Just think it through a little bit.
And so if there's a company person out there who wants to employ your services, how do they get a hold of you? What can you do for them?
Sure. So I can be contacted on my website, DebbieReynoldsConsulting.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So just type in Data Diva Debbie Reynolds and I'll pop right up. So I'm happy to chat and talk with people. And then also they can reach me on my podcast, the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, on which you've been a guest.
Yeah. It came out just recently.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's great talking to you. It's great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming, Debbie.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Debbie for coming on the show. That was a lot of fun. Of course, I've got some bonus Q&A for my patrons that will be coming out on Thursday morning, as usual. We talk a little bit more about Debbie's privacy journey, what it's like being a privacy person, but also being basically a public figure. That's an interesting little dynamic. And since she's a podcaster, as we talk a little bit about what it's like to doing a podcast and what we think a good podcast episode is all about, and just a little bit more from Debbie. So again, that'll come out Thursday as usual for my patrons. Coming up next week, we'll have a new show as usual. It will be slightly abbreviated, meaning, well, actually, it may be full length. There's been plenty of things I want to talk about, but it will be a little short in time frame. I'm due to some more travel. I've got a lot of trips this summer. They don't always interfere with my new shows. A lot of times, if the timing is right, they come on weekends when I've got an interview episode, so it doesn't matter. But in this case, I will be leaving a little bit early, so if there's any major stories that pop up toward the end of next week, they won't be covering that new show, and they'll have to wait for the next one. And then I've got more great interviews still in the pipeline. We're finally going to have the Bruce and Heidi Potter episode, the founders of ShmooCon. That was a lot of fun. And then we'll be talking with Andy Liddell from the EdTech Law Center about some of the horrid privacy violations going on with educational tech for students. It's really a sad state of affairs, but luckily these guys are on the case, literally the law case. And then several more great ones coming down the pipeline, so subscribe if you haven't, and then you won't miss any of those. That's going to do it for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there, and until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.